this paper is a case study of tea imports into the UK during the interwar period. And the broad context for this case study revolves around a number of themes. One is what is broadly called trade protection. So there's no hard tariffs for this particular. It is an appeal to consumers to exercise their alleged patriotic preference to buy empire teas. The broader context is also the Empire Marketing Board and a belief that Britain needs to do more to foster.
So tea is a quintessential empire product. It is also a commodity that is mass consumed by the early 20th century, and it's sort of culturally identified with Britishness. Its manufacture and marketing and distribution of the commodity also entails a significant level of capital investment and technology as well. And it attracted a lot of large corporates and firms. So in many ways, this industry is a very good, it provides a very good case study for exploring some of these bigger questions about empire preference or imperial preference and consumer choice as well, but also to understand how businesses try to influence this institutional and political environment, which this industry, that shaped this industry. So in a way, this case study helped us to look at a microcosm of the political economy, the larger political economy of patriotic buying and imperial preference in this period.
The primary sources we use are archival, and these archival materials are investigated at the British Library manuscripts room, which has the verbatim transcripts of the various tea associations from India giving evidence before the standing committee appointed to determine whether a marking order should be approved. We also reference the relevant archives at the National Archives in London, secondary trade press, trade journals, and our price series was obtained from a tea merchant, a tea importer and blender who still operates in London. And he gave us access to their archives, and from those archives we were able to construct the price series, which is an important part of the paper. We also, for contextual purposes, looked at how important imports were from the British Empire in relation to imports from foreign countries to determine how much choice consumers could exercise between empire and non-empire products. And the advantage of using the transcript evidence from the British Library is that we were able to attribute specific views to the main players in these debates, and we could then triangulate the veracity of these statements. The legislative background to our paper is the 1926 Merchandise Marks Act, and this belongs to a broader series of Merchandise Marks Acts which were introduced in the UK from 1862 until 1953. The 1926 Act is unusual in that it is the first piece of British legislation which specified that the country of origin, or an indication of foreign or an indication of empire, had to be marked on imported products, either at the time of their importation or at the time of sale in the UK. And we are principally interested in Section 2 of the 1926 Act. And this section prescribed that the Board of Trade or the Ministry of Agriculture could set up a standing committee which would hear applicants for a marking order, and the applicants had to substantially represent the interest of a particular trade. There was usually producers, but cases for a marking order could be made from trade unions, from consumers, from merchants, or anybody who the standing committee decided had a vested interest, that it was in the public interest that marking should be applied to these products. We focused on tea. Tea is an agricultural product, so we compared tea with the applications and marking orders made for all other agricultural products, such as grapes, salmon, beef, pork, eggs, and so on and so forth. And what happened is that most applications for marking for agricultural products were successful, but tea was not successful. And the other unusual thing about tea is, although it's an agricultural commodity, the application was not heard by the Ministry of Agriculture, it was heard by the Board of Trade. Both the Board of Trade and the Ministry of Agriculture had to follow exactly the same procedures for determining whether marking was in the public interest. So, for example, they had to consider whether it would damage the UK's re-export trade of that product. They had to consider all aspects of trade, generally the entrepôt trade. They also had to consider the feasibility of marking, whether it would damage the goods, whether consumers would be deceived, and whether the marking should be at the point of import, which then puts the onus on the exporter, or at the time of sale in the UK, which then puts the onus on the distributor or the retailer of that product.
Application was made under the 1926 Act by the tea producers, merchant groups, corporates, firms who own plantations in India and in Sri Lanka. And their argument was that under this particular order, tea sold at the retail level should carry a mark of whether it was an empire tea or non-empire tea. Now, one of the things that we show in the article is that this was actually a competitive strategy that they use under the guise of consumer protection to really protect their market share, because they were facing increasing competition from teas from non-empire origin, such as the Dutch East Indies, particularly Java. So that's one of the conclusions that we actually reached by looking at the applications and the motivations behind the applications and the way and the language that is actually used to argue in favor of this particular marking order. On the other hand, the defendants, if so to speak, of the or the people who opposed the marking order were the retailers and the blenders who had a series or lots of different brands under their own names at different price points, which made tea available in a blended form to different categories of consumers, both who actually liked more expensive and therefore higher quality tea, as well as those who looked at the middle range as well as the lower range of the. Now, one of the things that we demonstrate is that from a consumer choice perspective, consumers were a lot more choosy about the brands and the price that they of the teas, and did not apparently express a preference for empire or non-empire tea. That was what the retailers actually claimed. And the retailers basically resisted this marking order application on the basis that it would disrupt this highly tiered, highly segmented market, which was based on price and brands and quality as a result. So the Board of Trade, who actually looked at this application, concluded, they made two important conclusions. One is that consumers really didn't have a choice because most of the tea was imported from India and Sri Lanka, which was empire tea. Non-empire tea was really not sold as such in the UK. The other important conclusion that the Board of Trade draws is that this marking order would actually disrupt the way the industry actually functioned at a retail level. So it was basically um, on that contention or that conclusion that they rejected the application. So we see different groups here vying for control over the retail trade within the UK, but also in terms of who controlled the quality and the extent to which the quality was dependent upon the brand versus the origin of the product. And in this particular case, our conclusion is that it was really determined by the brand sold at a retail level in the UK, and the origin, whether it was an Empire tea or a non-Empire tea, it really did not figure into the ultimate decision about quality for the consumer. It's important to emphasize that when teas were imported into the UK, they were marked in terms of their origin. So chests of teas which were imported would have a marking in terms of which particular plantation they were imported from. So the origin at the wholesale level, at the point of import, is marked. The debate here was about whether this sort of marking should be extended at the retail level when the consumer actually went to the shop and bought tea. Usually it was loose tea at this point of time. It was not in tea bags or prepackaged tea. So the debate really was at the retail level, and it is important to sort of appreciate that at the retail level, there was no pure Indian tea or Ceylon tea or Java tea. All teas were blended. I think more than 90% or 95% of the teas carried some mixture of leaves from different origins. And that made it practically impossible to distinguish, because blends changed from not just from year to year or season to season, but often from month to month, because it allowed the blenders to be most economical in terms of which particular tea mixture that they used, because the ultimate quality standard was the cup of tea that the consumer drank, not where the tea actually came from. So the quality was in the brew, not necessarily the origin of the tea. And that was a point which the Board of Trade actually accepted, that the ultimate quality is not the origin, but the consistency of the final brew that the consumer actually drank.
The oddities we found in this paper to develop Aashish's point. Lots of agricultural commodities are imported into the UK, and they're processed into jam, they're processed into butter, and it is the same with tea. The raw tea is imported from various estates in India and Ceylon, and it's blended by expert blenders. And the problem then is the blended tea which is retailed in the UK, does that bear any relation to the raw commodity which was imported? And the 1926 Act is the first Merchandise Marks Act, which has this term substantial change. And this states that if a product is imported into the UK and is substantially changed, then it does not need to indicate its origin, because this substantial change makes it a British or Empire product. Unfortunately, the 1926 Act has never defined what a substantial change is. In America, customs have determined substantial change, and these cases go back to the early 19th century. But the UK courts have hardly ever had to decide what substantial change was. So that's the first problem. At what point does this imported commodity, does it become a British product simply because it's been blended? Does it become a British product if all the tea is from British Empire plantations, such as India and Ceylon? Or can it not be a British product if, say, for example, 15% of the blend is Java or Sumatra? So that's the first problem. And the second oddity is we considered the extent to which the tea marking application order was based on protectionist motives. And this was highly debated in the standing committees before the select committee. These were sort of highly debated in standing committees appointed by the House of Commons. And the strange thing was, the oddity really is that something of the order of 85 and 90% of the UK market was already supplied by Empire sources. So most consumers had the illusion of making a choice between Empire and non-Empire sources, but the market reality was that most of the tea they bought, unless they were an absolute first-class connoisseur, most of the tea that they bought would have included some Indian or Ceylon tea. That's the first thing to say. And the second thing is, the really bizarre thing we found out in the price series is that normally protection is based on the idea that producers are affected by low-cost imports. But the tea case shows that the price of Indian and Ceylon tea was greatly in excess of the price of Java and Sumatran tea. And this excess meant that the very limited preference given to Empire tea as a result of the 1919 Finance Act was irrelevant. Indian and Ceylon teas were so expensive relative to foreign teas that the preference they had on imports was minimal in comparison. So what you have is a market which is created in the UK, is dominated by Indian and Ceylon teas, and these teas are much more expensive than competitor teas.